This is a Founding Media podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Packing Taste. Today with us, we have Scott Jenson, the CEO and co-founder of Rhythm Superfoods, a very cool, healthy snack company based out of Austin, Texas. Thank you for joining us, Scott.
Thank you for inviting me. Can't wait to have this little chat.
Yeah, I've been very excited. I know our friend Kirsten, got us together, but you are a legend here in Austin, so I'm very honored to have you on here, and I'm sure we'll be able to chit-chat a little bit about velocity and superfoods and how brands kick off in Austin. But mainly where I want to start is kind of some background, where you're from, how you got started. Are you a Texan? Are you an Austinite?
I've been here for 25 years, so as long as most other people have been, but or longer. But I was born in the East Coast in Connecticut. I lived there for 3 or 4 years. Father and mother and sister and I moved to Fort Lauderdale and was there for like 6 or 7 years. And then he's kind of moving around from one bank job to another bank job, and took over the leadership of another bank up in New Hampshire. So we moved from Fort Lauderdale up into New Hampshire. But I really loved the warmth and was, moved when I was like, 10 or 11 years old in January to New Hampshire. So I was like, let me try to find a way back down to warmth. So when it came to going to college, I sought out, all the universities here in Texas and Florida and ended up at SMU in Dallas.
Nice. And what did you study there?
I got a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a Bachelor of Arts in Business Communication. So kind of, always influential to consumer kind of focus. I liked marketing. Yeah, I loved marketing, loved business. And so it took me an extra year at SMU in order to make that happen, but did get it done.
With the victory lap.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And did you always have an interest in because when I think of psychology plus business, I think of behavior, human behavior and consumer behavior. Really, was that something that always sparked your interest? How to turn things on in people's brains?
Yeah, I mean, I was at a very young age. I was always buying stuff and selling it at school, whether it was a candy that people couldn't get, or fireworks that were illegal in one state, but we happened to drive through another state. So there was always kind of this weird dynamic of understanding what people wanted and couldn't get. I spent my youth doing that, sometimes selling things that I shouldn't have and got in trouble with,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, what kind of things? Just fireworks?
Fireworks is the big one.
Oh, okay.
They don't really like that in Florida at the time. So you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And my mom and dad didn't really know I was doing that. I was stealing their fireworks that they would buy when we would drive down I-95 from Connecticut and stop in South Carolina and load up with some fireworks. And then I'm stealing them and selling them for $1 a pack in school.
Oh, nice. So you always had some sort of an entrepreneurial spirit in you.
Yeah.
Kind of hustling, kind of selling some fireworks. And then, so when did you start having interest towards food? And I guess, was that also in college?
I was enamored with advertising agencies when I kind of added at SMU this second degree of business communications, basically marketing, advertising, PR, that kind of stuff. I really, got enamored with the David Ogilvy's and the Leo Burnett and the classic 1950s, 60s, 70s. They were studying psychology and using that kind of language of understanding human behavior to create advertising to present consumer products. And so when I came out of SMU, I got the job at what was then called the Bloom Agency, number one or number two largest ad agency in Texas at the time. It was eventually purchased by Publicis. But I got to work on stuff like Kern's Nectars and what was called Rainbow Bread. Campbell Taggart was the company. Big bakery company, Grant's Farm Bread, Church's Fried Chicken, Carnation, Contadina Pasta. And a lot of the advertising accounts that agency had were consumer products. And at some point, being there for almost 2 years, I wanted to be a bigger part of it than just the advertising. So I wanted to work at, a major corporation and see if I could do more than just the advertising part of it. So decided to go get my MBA and ended up graduating from NYU in New York with my MBA there.
So you went back to the East Coast.
Yeah.
That was calling you, huh?
Yeah. And, for many reasons, it was an outstanding school. But in the end, when I was up in New York, I really missed Texas. I missed my friends down here. I had made some really deep relationships and good friends. So I was trying to figure out after I got out of my MBA, I started working for a company called James River Corporation. I think it's now part of International Paper, but they were like a $7 or $8 billion paper company, like Dixie cups and Dixie plates, Northern bathroom tissue, Brawny paper towel, so stuff like that. And I was working on the Dixie cups and Dixie plates business. And so that kind of elevated me. Like I was working with the ad agencies to do some, marketing, but also, traveling to manufacturing locations to work with our manufacturers and R&D. Yeah. So kind of like became more of the hub of the wheel versus the spoke. Yeah. And it's pretty satisfying. But
and sorry to interrupt, but what did you study? Is there a specific focus for your MBA? Did you do more?
You don't do, and maybe they've changed it now, but there was no like major. You
it was just MBA.
You had an emphasis, and
okay,
so
yes.
and maybe they change it now. I don't know what they call it now, but so you would call it computer science now, but working with computers, mm-hmm. And so back then, I remember like so I'd go to the computer lab, and there was a friend of mine from Tel Aviv, and he had a friend who was in Tel Aviv at the university. And the beginnings of the internet was peer-to-peer communication. You could get online mm-hmm. with, this dial-up modem, and you could type and communicate with your friend without having to pay for a long distance call. And so that became the network of the internet. But that's how, to just give perspective, this is only, 25 years ago or 30 years ago, but that's the beginning of the internet. So if you think of computer science back then and looking at what we would do, it's nothing like today. We're talking like, when the cavemen first decided that they could make a wheel out of a round stone.
Yeah. I remember when we played computer games at my parents' house, we still had dial-up, so we'd hear that beautiful beep, sound. Beep, yeah. And every now and then that rings in my head. And now to think like I have LTE access on my phone and everything is just super fast. And I guess speaking of super, when you moved back to Texas, Superfoods still weren't a thing, mm-hmm. Right? So what really, other than the warmth and the beauty of Texas, what else called you here? And did you come here with an idea to start something?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, I was very happy working at James River Corporation. I was doing fun stuff, exciting stuff, learning all brand new things to me. But I did miss Texas, quite honestly. And one of my roommates and good friends, while I was getting my MBA, my roommate, John Scott, and then my good buddy, Eddie Patterson, we were both kind of transplanted, quote unquote, Texans, because I had spent time in Texas. They were born here. And we had this great idea when one of our friends, this guy named C.B. Stubblefield or Stubb, had called John and said, "Hey man, I'm really broke, behind on my rent. I need some cash." And so we rounded up. I think John was tallying up like $1,400 We all kind of knew Stubb because he had a restaurant here in Austin and everyone had eaten there before, but John was really close to him. So he kind of pioneered grabbing some cash from friends and relatives and sent him $1,400 and said, I hope this helps you out, man. And then...
And why did you guys want to help? Just because he was a friend?
He's kind of like the grandfather you never had if your grandfather passed away at your early age. He was just a great sage. And if you ever came down to Austin and wanted to eat, like he'd sit down at your table and chat with you for 15 minutes. So I had spent only a couple of times previous to that reach out at his restaurant in Austin. And it was really because I was at SMU in Dallas.
Yeah.
But we came down to Austin 4 or 5 times a year to have fun with friends. But I didn't know him that well, but got to know him real well and just fell in love with him as a family member. But that money that was sent then was reciprocated back by him a few months later. He countered air freighted a cooler of hot barbecue. So back in the day before 9/11, you could go to the ticket counter at not the Bergstrom Airport, but the Mueller Airport, and you could drop off a package and the first available flight to wherever American or whoever would go, it would be there however many hours later. So we went out to LaGuardia and picked up a cooler and another box of barbecue sauce and brought it back, and we're like, all right, well, we better have a party tonight because there's a lot of barbecue to eat.
So he shipped it from here to
New York City.
New York.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were still there at the time in New York City, and we pretended we cooked it on a hibachi or something and had a big party, and all of our friends were like, this is awesome. This is the best barbecue I've ever had. There was no one smoking barbecue in New York City. There was a place called Dallas Barbecue. There was 5 or 6 locations, and they were just charcoal grilling chicken, and they call it barbecue. So to bring something that's been slow smoked that you've never had before, people were like, what the heck is this? This is like the first time you've tried some sort of cultural food that's done excellently. And then the barbecue sauce bottle. So he had taken some Jack Daniel's bottles from the Continental Club when they were empty, gathered up 4 or 5 or 6 of them, had his buddy Joe Ely on a little Mac computer print out a little label with Stubb's face on it. And that's what he sent us, with these Jack Daniel's bottles with his face on it. And that's the light bulb, right? So we're sitting here and everyone that's trying it is blown away by the flavor of the barbecue sauce. And we're like, okay, let's start a business. Well, took us a couple of years, and we're still in New York City finishing up my MBA. And my partner, John, his law degree, Eddie was working for a company there and hitting the streets. But it took us that long to like accurately build a plan of a business plan and working with Stubb and people down here to, give him a little bit of money to make some sauce to sell to other small people. But it wasn't like this big company that was going to take off.
And so it was you, John, and Eddie, you guys
Stubb.
met, and Stubb, but y'all met in SMU?
No.
Or y'all met in New York?
We had mutual friends in Austin. John and I did. He was really like close friends with our corporate lawyer, David Wood. He was roommates with him at one point down here at UT. So you come down, you hang out, and suddenly you're friends.
Yeah.
And I was getting my MBA in New York. John was going to finish his and do an internship at the New York Stock Exchange. He needed a place to live, and I needed a roommate for the last semester.
Yeah.
And so he moved in because he was from Lubbock. Eddie was from Lubbock. Their parents knew each other and connected all 3 of us up in New York.
Okay. And then you guys all had, by this time, you were seasoned students, right? Getting MBAs. So you guys knew how to draft a business plan.
We did. I'm a hell of a lot better now than I was then. Well, we still have a copy of that first business plan.
You guys do?
It's pretty light. Yeah. I mean, when you're like 26, and maybe you haven't worked at a private equity firm. I mean, they didn't even exist back then, quite honestly. There was no VC or private equity. But like to start a company, there wasn't the path that there is right now, the infrastructure of information you can find in books and on the internet. And you can find 100 really good deal docs, business plans right now. There wasn't any of it. There was no internet.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to the entrepreneur professor at NYU and go, can you help us on this? And so, we did the basics of competition. What's the whole scalable market? What's our operations plan? Where's the budget for the next 3 or 4 years? And of course, we were going to take over the world. So there was a huge hockey stick of revenue.
Of course.
And then we found out that it was much harder to get on the shelf than we assumed. But, when you're that young, you'll take no, and then you walk out the door and go, okay, we'll just come back in 3 or 6 months. So the no's came, but we came back and we're persistent. And people finally just got tired of saying no to us, and they put our product on the shelf, and then we'd work our asses off to make sure it would come off the shelf, whether that was I'm going to demo, do demonstrations, cooking, whatever, feed your entire store 5 times, every single store you have that we can get to. We used to have this old bus in the first 3 or 4 years. It was old Bluebird school bus that was painted red, white, and blue, just like the flag of Texas. And we would travel to, we were in Florida for 3 months with that bus, just doing demos at Publix, because Publix had just let us get into their stores. And we're like, we got to make it happen. So getting that velocity was just tenacity.
Yeah.
There was plenty of other multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies that had barbecue sauce on the shelf, much cheaper than us. And there were some local guys, not a lot of them. Like you look at barbecue sauce right now, and every region's got 25 local brands that are trying to be the next Stubbs, I guess. But it wasn't as competitive then as it is right now. But we were tenacious, and it needed that to happen. You have to have this I'm not going to fail kind of attitude, because brick walls are being built to keep you from succeeding at all times.
Yeah, totally agree. And I mean, so you guys moved back to Austin. Mm-hmm. You guys were all in the 20-somethings, full of energy, full of passion, it sounds like. And you were getting, was there like a barbecue spark or a barbecue trend happening at the time? Or was it like, damn, there was no access to really good barbecue sauce in other states? Like, it sounded like when you guys had that party in New York, people were like, oh, this is what real barbecue is? It's not just chicken over coal?
When national access starts happening to something that's great, it doesn't have to be barbecue. But we in Texas, you got to Lockhart or some of the other cities that have their famous old places. Austin has its famous old places. Those great places have been around forever, but it's hard to think back pre-internet and pre-500 channels of cable or satellite TV, because the Food Network and the Food TV and the this food and that food and the celebration of food that is non-existent. Maybe there was, couple of magazines that were very highbrow. They weren't celebrating the best barbecue in America. They were celebrating the new chef, sauce that is, put on your braised beef Wellington. I'm just making that up, but that's kind of where the world of culinary was. But when you get broader and you have the ability to have it on the internet and so many channels on cable that were exploding, they need content. And so content got down to, Guy Fieri's dives, drive-ins, and whatever that show is, right? And I love that show. I'm just saying, you have these great little slices that can get very minute in what they're focusing on. And so barbecue became a huge celebration. You find out that, 3 or 4 regions of the country are claiming to be the best. That's a good hook editorially. And then you're like, why do they think it's the best? Let's go investigate. And that's editorial content right there. So we were at a point where the advancement in available information, easier to get, curiosity of, if you want to learn how to do barbecue back then, you had to go to Barnes & Noble and see if in the food section there was 1 or 2 books. There was no other way to do research. You had to, or get in the car and drive around and interview people. But at the touch of a finger 15 years ago, it's everything is there for you.
Yeah. Okay. And kind of switching gears. So you guys started Stubbs Barbecue, did the venue, grew the company to a couple millions of dollars. exited, and then, well, I guess you...
The sauce company was sold to McCormick.
Yeah. And you stepped down from the CEO position before that, and you started...
Rhythm.
Yep. And so how did that kind of start? Did you had left, you wanted to do something else, you had grown Stubbs to the size you wanted to grow it. How did that all play out?
Yeah, I mean, I had been there for a long time, and that period of time when you've got investors' money and like I'm kind of a growth kind of person, and we decided as a board and ownership group that maybe we wouldn't be spending all of the profits on more growth. So there was a need internally with our shareholder and investor base and ownership and all of us, how do we plan for the taking some money off the table, or are we tied up into this forever? And for about the year and a half before that, though, we were here in Austin, and the barbecue sauce was damn near every supermarket chain in the entire country. Maybe we didn't have every store, but the original barbecue sauce was like in 90% of the ACV, or all commodity volume number of stores. But we weren't in Whole Foods because the Stubbs original recipes were using, a specific, sauce, Worcestershire sauce, soy sauce base. So the ingredients we were using were 55-gallon drums, commercial level. And in some of those ingredients, there was like sulfite or sodium benzoate.
Which Whole Foods doesn't allow.
Correct. And so we couldn't get in there. And we were just kind of, scratching our head and going, well, I mean, can't we figure out how to make it natural and not change the taste? Because you're committed to not changing the recipe, right? On Stubbs, dying last day was, in his way saying, don't ever let anyone mess with my recipe. So we were committed to that. But like what we didn't know is those same companies we were buying those ingredients from were also making versions of the exact same thing without sulfite or sodium benzoate. We just didn't ask because we didn't know the movement that was going on for natural and organic foods. And, the Natural Products Expo West was like 150 exhibitors, not like 2,500 or whatever it is now. So it was small, right?
Yeah.
But Whole Foods was growing, and they were on our radar, and they're right here, and we knew people that worked there and were buyers. And so that was one of those things like, well, let's see if we can do it. And we did do it. And the sauce we made was indiscernible. It was the exact same recipe. So that was a successful, I think that was one of the sparks in my head, because we ended up going to the Natural Products Expo. I think the first one we went to, because of the timing, was Expo East, and that was pretty small, smaller than Expo West by the time we got around to it. And I was blown away at the type of companies that were there and the energy there. And then doing a little bit of research showed me how fast the growth was of this category. The
natural category?
Yeah, an organic category. And just in general, in our segment in barbecue sauce, it's not a growth category, right? It was a mature category that is going to grow, say, the population growth 1% to 2% a year, and that's it. So we were growing at much more than that. I don't know, anywhere from 8% to 15% a year, but that's stealing market share from someone else.
Yeah.
But I've been doing that for a while, and our group wanted to slow things down, maybe get dividends, and so we ended up finding a really, really good leader to come in there and be there for the transition of what eventually resulted in the sale to McCormick. So Matt Gase, who now runs Lantana Foods here in Austin, was the guy that came in. And I before I left, meeting with various people to see what I wanted to do next. And
you were thinking, I want to do something natural.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something
no question about it. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't so much trendy, but I wanted it to be honest and healthy. So honest and healthy. And what does that mean? It means many different things. But when I met this gentleman named Keith Warr, I was introduced to Keith by Clayton Christopher, who about the same time we were selling Stubbs, maybe it was a year earlier, they had sold he and David Smith from High Brew Coffee had sold sweet leaf tea to Nestle Waters. So they were kind of trying to figure out what they were going to do. Clayton had, already started the Deep Eddy Vodka Company with Chad Aller here in Austin. And David stayed with the Sweet Leaf Tea Company and Nestle to help them in their transition, I think, for about a year. And then he went and did a 6-month sailboat trip on their sailboat.
That sounds beautiful.
He was. They were working hard to get that company where it was. So, ended up deciding after I met this guy Keith Warr that it was a perfect opportunity to look at a company in its infancy. He was making these kale chips, and I was like, okay, let's see if this product, super high nutrition, crunchy, snacky. Let me send it out to a bunch of people and see if it's got legs, brokers, buyers, So we started shipping out some samples.
And when you say healthy, and I guess, so superfoods, just to take a step back, superfoods essentially means healthy foods and this is a question.
Really good question.
Yeah. So like beet chips and kale chips, that just automatically sounds healthier than a normal Lay's potato chip. Is it just as simple as this is a vegetable? Well, I guess potato is a vegetable as well, but we don't put any, what's the main difference there?
Yeah. So it's not defined by the FDA. So if you were to talk to the Subway sandwich shop company, because they put avocado and call it a superfood on sandwiches, we called ourselves Rhythm Superfoods. It's always been kind of a slightly moving target of what it is. And that's not necessarily great, but I'm not going to try to remember the exact words on it, but we do define what we call it on our website because we're committed to transparency and honesty. And you can't necessarily go out and say that something is a superfood if one person's belief is, it's got more than 1 gram of sugar, it can't be a superfood. Another person says, no, but it's got 17 grams of fiber, so it is a superfood. So all the definitions change. I worry about the name superfood and what will happen in the next 3, 4, 5 years with that name. So we're nervous about it. We don't like that it never did catch on to have an FDA kind of like identification for what it is, but it is our name. That's what we called ourselves. And so we're careful about the ingredients and the type of items that we try to make, and that they have superior nutrition to the mainstream item that they're competing against.
Okay, so there's no real definition that the FDA has somewhere on their wall.
When there's confusion in the marketplace, that's when they step in because they want clarity with the consumers, but there is no definition now, and so it's kind of the Wild West. Whoever wants, if you want to call a Snickers bar superfood, you could make a claim that there's 3 grams of protein or something like that on there, and it's got plenty of energy because it's got sugar. So you might by consumers be called a fraud, but I don't call them a fraud because I don't know the definition to it. So
so I guess what you guys do is you take, this is what superfoods is, and we define it this way. Superfoods to us means this.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And I think transparency there is key because it's like there's no real definition. This is what we think it is. We're showing you. Do you agree? And it seems like most of your customers agree because they keep buying the chips.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're totally a way healthier option than most of the other chips in the chip aisle, at least.
Everything we make is organic. I'm sure there's a percentage of the population that would say, that must be a superfood then, because there is confusion in the marketplace. But if I gave you a bag of sugar that was organic, I think 99% of the people would say, oh, no, it's not a superfood. But I guarantee you there's some people that would think it is.
Of course.
Because they're confused by what does non-GMO verified mean? What does organic mean? There's still massive confusion over what it actually means. So we just try to be transparent in it and then guide ourselves to kind of the railroad tracks that we try to stay in between. And you won't see a white potato chip from us because there's really no nutrition there.
Yeah.
So those are the things we stay away from.
Yeah. And I guess the way you guys were educating people, because when you started Rhythm, Superfoods was a buzzword people love to hear. It was a healthy, being in Austin, like everyone's so healthy, like health conscious here. But the way you were educating the consumers was through this method of transparency, right? It's like
it was. I'll give a little hitch though. When we first started, we were really only making the kale chips, and there was a movement then that raw foods, those being less processed at lower heat, mostly low temperature dehydration, and it is a fact that it allows the enzymes inside the cellular structure of the vegetable or fruit itself to live. But the raw foods diet, if you will, it wasn't necessarily like I'm on the raw foods diet to lose weight. It's more like that's what I'm committing myself is to eat more raw foods. We were in the raw food sets of various supermarkets, and it really didn't take off, whether the variety wasn't there or everyone thought that they needed to make a kale chip to be in the segment. There was like 9 companies making kale chips. The raw category just didn't take off. So kind of found ourselves a little orphaned early on of if that's not going to take off and more stores aren't going to put that in, then why are we raw? And, self-reflection and trying to figure out if people aren't adapting to this, then we need to make a change. So we took raw off, not because we weren't making the product the exact same way, but it also could have been confusing in the marketplace and to the FDA. When you start making certain claims, there are all kinds of folks out there, lawyers that gather consumers to be 2 or 3 people that seem to have been confused by something on the package. So we did not want to go through the legal haranguing of the legal trolls that look for companies that have a claim that could be refuted. And so we asked ourselves, could this be refuted? And we're like, well, it doesn't matter if it's refuted or not. If that's the claim they want to go after, then you're tied up in a lawsuit, whether you're right or wrong.
Yeah.
And usually you end up settling with them. So.
Yeah. And but even then, I think because there wasn't an exact definition or no real defining point for superfood is let's just be transparent as possible because that's our evidence, I guess.
Yeah.
So when you guys started Rhythm, you were going from a barbecue sauce. You guys started a barbecue sauce company. We're doing that kind of velocity, which I'm sure it picked up and it was high velocity by the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But when you geared over to snacks and chips, velocity in that category, not only are you dealing with different buyers, but everything moves a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how was that like seeing that velocity? And I'm assuming seeing smaller numbers with like a bag of chips is way cheaper than a jar of barbecue sauce.
Not our chips.
Not your chips. So how was it like transitioning and dealing with that kind of production or that kind of velocity?
Yeah, we had a very specific situation that I had never seen in my limited years in the food business. But when we first launched the kale chips and started selling them to a couple of Whole Foods regions, and then we got into some H-E-Bs and some more stores. If you think of the supply chain and the manufacturing element of how you have to make the product, if someone like Publix wants to put us in 500 or 600 stores, I then have to go to my farmers and say, hey, do you have additional 25 acres of land, and can we start tiering that land so that we can get an additional X number of tons per week in whatever time it takes to grow those seeds? So we're having to think 5 and 6 months ahead. And when we hear, when we get a yes from a retailer, oftentimes it's a 6-month kind of cycle where they're trying to, manage their category. But sometimes you get a yes and they want the product in 2 months, right? So managing that part of it when you're kind of growing relatively fast is a challenge. Kale then became its own hero separately. Like it was on the Kardashian show, and all the chefs were cooking and making soups, and they tested salads with kale at McDonald's, and so it had its own like day where it was almost like overhyped, but that overhyping meant that everyone wanted kale chips. So we were chasing production scale. Like there's no contract manufacturers that have the equipment that it takes to make the kale chips. So we had to buy our own equipment, and we were not necessarily interested in getting at that point into our own self-manufacturing. We wanted to focus on the sales and marketing. So we did find partners along the way that would allow us to bring and buy our own equipment and bring it into their co-packing facilities. And they manage the raw material procurement, the food safety, the labor, the people that make the product and packing it into the bags and all that kind of stuff. So we had a couple of partners as we grew, but many people, when they grow, if you were to make your brand new, Axel salsa, and you gave me some of that chimichurri here, like I can name 10 people within 150 miles of here that can make that next Friday for you, right? You just name the jar size and the ingredients and we're ready to go. Because that industry of taking liquid products, mixing them in a certain way and filling them through a filler, jarring them with a capper and putting a label on with a labeler and then putting it into a box is like old as the country, right? Like
you make it sound so simple.
Yeah. I know the chimichurri's not.
Yeah. But I guess
anyone can do that. We had to buy our own equipment whenever we scale.
Yes.
And we're talking about $500,000 dehydrators.
Yeah.
So typically when you're raising capital for growth capital. We were raising capital for assets. And that's not the easiest professional investment dollars to get. Because kale was exploding, we were chasing it always. We always wanted to make sure we weren't going to buy a new capacity to double it before we knew we had retailers saying it. But like once the retailers said yes, we needed that product in 3 months or 4 months. So, there was a whole rockiness of until we finally got like 4 or 5 dehydrators where we couldn't like grow without a bump.
Yeah. Now was that so that extreme focus in production, do you think that's across the board with all high velocity products, or was it because you guys were doing kale chips and the Kardashians were talking about it and everybody wanted kale?
If you like,
or a mixture of both.
No, it's like on the high velocity, Axel's new energy bar, right? So the new energy bar is an extruded product that gets mixed in a big Hobart, dumped into a forming machine or extruded and put onto a flow wrapping machine. If that company that is making those bars for you can do your month's worth of production in one day, it's not hard for them to triple it by just doing 2 days of production. So the equipment is there. They're ready to scale. They just have to add labor. For us, it was really the equipment. Mm-hmm. It's very, the $500,000 dehydrators, 6 months lead time to buy those. You better, if you're going to buy one, you better have the retailers that are saying yes. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you've just spent a shitload of money. And this thing is sitting there idle. So that was the balance. Like it wasn't an unlimited pool of money ready to just buy as much equipment as we wanted.
And then when you guys, obviously when everyone's eating kale, that's very helpful to your brand, but was there other methods that you guys focused on to increase a high velocity item? And is it different with low velocity items? Or because I consider my sauces low velocity and my goal is to make them high velocity. But again, people use my jar of chimichurri 3 or 4 times versus a bag of chips. It's
gone.
Yeah.
So this is just opinion, not fact. But to just answer one more thing from your previous question. So we had that high velocity when the demand was there and we were darn near the only guys making the kale chips or could do it. But shortly thereafter, a couple of sizable competitors popped up on the East Coast and West Coast. When we were the only guys on the shelf, we were incredibly high velocity. You couldn't believe the turns that we were having. And we couldn't keep up because the kale chip was this hero and we were the only ones making enough to sell. But all of a sudden there was 2 other brands on the shelf. So now they have a choice for it. So the velocities went down because of competition. The category kept growing, but for us, the velocity went down. We kept growing because we're getting into more stores. But so that velocity can be, when you have something unique, that in and of itself can drive velocity. There's probably not, when you go to a condiment section, there's probably not 7 versions of chimichurri, right? There's probably 2. Because it's not a massive category. It's not used a lot, like a A1 steak sauce. Both are going on beef, but the A1 steak sauce has been around forever, and it's like $1.99 for 8 ounces instead of something that's more expensive.
$9
$9,
for 9
yeah.
ounces.
But so velocity to me, and particularly when you're a small company, it's hard to drive consumers to do what they're already not doing. And as a smaller company that doesn't have the ability to educate on a grand scale, you got to do things on a less than grand scale. That's like demoing at a lot of stores. So if you're in 30 stores in Austin, do 2 4-hour demos at 2 different stores that are close to each other on a Saturday and a Sunday. So you've just knocked off 4 stores. Go back the next week and switch the date and do the same stores again, because people pattern their grocery shopping. So if you were at HEB 153 on one day on a Saturday morning, and you went to Whole Foods number 69 on the afternoon, if you flip those, you'll have a different type of person. And then all of a sudden, you've maybe met 20% of their entire shopping group on a very, very busy day. And if you've converted 30 to 60 people to try your stuff and buy it because you're there and having them taste it, that little circle of 5 miles around that store, or whatever the geographic circle is for that particular store, you now have a neighborhood of people that are committed to your product. So it's worth it. Like, each person that you touch and they buy it, if they like it, it better be good. If they don't like it, they won't. But particularly you in particular, if your name's on the package and you're actually sitting there doing it, so do a couple hundred of those over the next 2 years, and you will see the velocity grow. Yeah. That's one sure thing for sure. Paying other people to do it is expensive, and there's the balance of, am I getting the growth and the revenue by spending $160 for someone to be in that store for 4 hours? Or is it worth my time for at least a couple hundred of it? Like, I'm older than you, so...
A little bit.
Yeah. And I've got 2 young boys at home and a wife that wants to see me more, I think. So Saturdays and Sundays are precious, so I can't do that. But like, that's what we did. I did 300 demos in the first 3 years that we had Stubbs. And they were anywhere from Virginia to Tennessee to Florida to Texas to California. And that, I believe, like, if you pick a store, say it's Publix, and they've got, at the time, 800 stores, you do a third of their stores. You don't do the small stores because there's hardly anything that you can do to pick up the velocity. You want to value your time there, so do their big heavyweight stores where there are a lot of people coming in. You've got 3 times the touch points at that store for the 4 hours than you do at one of their C locations. You do a third of their stores a couple of times. You've got the velocity chain wide now, that now you're like, you can do promotions that matter. You can spend $15,000 to get an off-shelf display and see if you can get more people to try your products.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of other ways of increasing velocity, but that's the tried and true small companies way of doing it before they get to where they have larger budgets. And that's the way we did it.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And everyone who's been on the show says, like, the number one is you go and do the demos, and you keep doing them and keep doing them. And even when you're making millions, you keep doing them because people want to connect with the people who started the brand.
And find ways to do them more efficiently. Like, you could be doing demos on Fox 7 News in the morning, showing how to grill a steak with chimichurri sauce for Father's Day. Then all of a sudden, whatever their viewership is, 50, 100,000 people that night might see it. That's a demo, right? You're not at the store, but that becomes an more efficient demo because your time is now more valuable. Still get in the store. If you wander the stores and hang out in the stores, you learn more about consumers and how stores work and store directors and how they want to run their stores than you can do by reading any book or listening to someone else. So you got to spend a little time in the stores no matter how long the company is in business.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I'm sure when you guys were doing that with Stubbs or even the early stages of Rhythm, it's totally different now. And I didn't think of this until you just said that, but like going in front of whatever Fox News or whatever TV morning station, you do have a wider audience, but now we also have Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. So maybe making a 60-second video of you making a steak with chimichurri sauce, paying $15 for it to hit 20,000 quote unquote users.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So there's like a lot of new ways to play around with it. Okay. I know we're running out of time, but
too bad.
Yeah, I know this is getting good. I wanted to ask, two things. First, what was it helpful being in Austin? Could you have started those brands and have been as successful in a different city or state, or did being in Austin, a super trendy, hip place, help, and being in Texas where everyone's always eating steak and meats help as well?
I think, the authenticity of the Stubbs brand was clearly, we had to be in Austin. That's where Stubb was at the time and had a barbecue restaurant previously there. So the whole brand was authenticity. It was Stubbs' recipe. He demanded his face be on the label and the quotes on there, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a cook." It was him. And we didn't mess with any of his recipes. And he was the guy. He was like the grandfather you never had. And so that had to happen there. I would say that the infrastructure of Austin at the time that we started it, there was no investor. No one talked investor or there was nothing like that going on. There was no like the SKU accelerator program. There wasn't the programs that are over at UT. It wasn't. So
there was
anything.
No CPG.
No, there was Michelangelo's Italian frozen foods up in North Austin, but he had moved from San Diego, and we didn't know it. I mean, halfway through, we met Clayton and David, and we're like, there's another, group in Austin that's making tea. But as we got later into the sauce company, and I personally believe it was a moment in time. There was a catalyst, like in the 2008 kind of economic crisis. There was a lot of people from, let's just say, the West Coast and East Coast that found Austin. Like, I don't know anyone's personal story, but I can't afford this house anymore in LA. This is ridiculous. I'm a chef and I'm doing this. Or, we had a creative class of people that came from New York and from California and from other places that were like, this is cool and it's not expensive. And there's a great music scene and outdoor scene. And so the imprimatur that Austin has and gives to like that class of people, it's like they flocked here. And then you start seeing like the food trucks and food cart stuff happening after that.
That was in the early 2000s, late 90s when?
The 2008 when the big kind of, everything was cool before that, but 2008 was when the economic crisis hit. And we saw here in Austin massive people from California, mostly California, and even in New York, I think it was the second biggest migration of folks that were just like, they were chasing the dream but couldn't afford it and found this as a great place to come. And so not only food artistry, but artists themselves, painters, sculptors, glass workers, all that kind of stuff helped to support, before the Keep Austin Weird was hippies for the most part and country western hippies, if you will. But this class of people came in and suddenly it was a lot of people starting businesses and food and beverage businesses. That's my belief is that was this turning point that happened. And there were people like us, like Eddie and John and myself and Clayton and David that had already like broken down the walls of how to do this. We didn't have a book that said this is the way you do it. We were accessible and kind and helpful. And if anyone wanted to come up to us and say, well, how'd you do it? What do you think about this? This broker's good and that broker's not good. This retailer's going to charge you too much, so say no to that. So having some sages in the group here helped the younger people or the new entrepreneurs. And then you have this formalization of things like SKU. Now we have Naturally Austin. We've got, private equity that invests professionally in town. And so all that stuff creates an infrastructure that not everyone can take advantage of, but some can. And I meet people all the time. I'm like, how come I don't know you guys have been here for 2 years and you're doing this really cool thing? Did no one tell me? I got my own blinders on, but somehow that's what happened here in Austin. And everyone is willing to share.
Of course, and I love that's one of the most beautiful parts about being Texan.
Yeah.
And being here in Austin, everyone loves to share their information, their knowledge, their support. So I guess in 100 years from now, when people are studying Texas, you guys are going to be the avant-gardes, the hipster cowboys that kind of started the whole CPG trend here during the 08 crisis, which is honestly a very cool story now that you told me. Okay, lastly, I definitely wanted to ask this. Should every brand grow with an exit strategy in mind?
When I saw that question that you had sent me, it really hit me hard because I could flip-flop in every circumstance, right? Like there's being a part of the SKU accelerator here in Austin, like for the first several years, you're like, in the end, we're going to have a pitch day. It's hard to grow right now without capital. It doesn't mean you can't. But if a new idea happens, I always use this expression, this story to express what's happening out there in the marketplace. Like 5 or 6 years ago, I tasted my first bone broth and I loved the product, and it's got its own little story about what it does for you with collagen and all that kind of stuff. But they launched that product and it was a frozen product. And then, at a trade show, 6 months later at the next trade show, there's another company. And then 6 months later, there's another brand. You would never see that happen when we started Stubbs. It was kind of a sleepy, deal, the food industry. But because the financing is out there, it now escalates the competition so fast. And there's some really, really sharp entrepreneurs creating really delicious and good products with incredible packaging. So first mover, not always, but majority of the time, that is financed the best in many of these newer categories particularly, ends up winning because money oftentimes wins. So there are certain things I look at and I go, wow, that's brand new. And no one even knows about that, but it's easy to make. So unless you move fast, someone else is going to catch up to you. And I was talking to the Siete founders maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and they didn't have to raise a lot of money. They raised about the same amount of money as we did at Stubbs, but they have a lot of competition out there trying to figure out,
because they do hot sauces, Mexican style.
But their chips have really taken off, and the almond tortillas that they make it really took off.
They've done national rollouts at Whole Foods.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
but they had such a unique item, and it was able to be appropriately margined so that they didn't have to lose money for 7 years to make it work. So sometimes you have these great bolts of lightning that come down that when they were a SKU graduate, and that's where I got to meet them and just so impressed with what they've done with their brand. But I just use that as an example of it's not everyone has to go out and try to raise $20 million to win. Each one is a different story. And so you do owe your investors the respect that you're going to manage their money well, give them reporting on what you're doing, and try with every ounce of your body to give them money back at some point. So if you don't take a lot of that money, then you get to call the shots and grow it however slowly you want to grow it.
Yeah. And I guess, should entrepreneurs or new founders say, okay, I want to grow this super fat next 3 to 5 years and sell it at year 5 for this amount? Or is that totally silly to think? And you should be no, start something you believe in and that you never want to let go of.
Oh, well, the start something you believe in. There's no way to go through the battles that you have here. If the objective is to sell it, the heartache is way too hard. So you have to have some sort of mission that you're really, really into, because no matter what, you're going to be running into a lot of brick walls and a lot of no's and problems. And a recall or plant breaks down or
I'm gonna knock on wood on that one.
Yeah, every retailer doesn't want your stuff or consumers hate it. Like there's all kinds of things, but you can also pivot and take a left and a right and a left and a right. So with all that heartache, just like any other startup, you better be in for the long haul, because saying that, I'm just going to do this and then we'll flip it in 3 to 5 years. First of all, it almost never happens. There are unicorns that defy that logic, but it almost never happens. So if you're going to be with and marry someone, you better like them a lot, because you're going to be with it for a while, particularly if you take capital. Like you can't just like take the first no, and you've taken $1 million of someone's money and like things didn't work out at first. And you're like, oh, well, sorry about that. Like, this retailer said they're not going to bring it in. So I guess we're going to, die. That's an easy one. You can come back 6 months later and there's 50 more retailers you can go to, but those kind of like slaps in the face are going to happen. And so if you don't have the internal, gumption to like make things work and work and work and work, the 3 to 5 year, this is what I'm going to do. You'll turn around and get out of it in a year. Because the punches to the face are often.
And you got to have some sort of passion to take those punches. Yeah. Well, beautiful. I wish we had a whole nother hour to keep talking about this. But is there anything you want to add? Any shout outs you want to give before we wrap up?
Well, I think one other thing I would just say that I get asked a lot from people is, should we make this stuff ourselves? And that closing thought, or should we have someone else make it? Like when I said like that, every single product and every single company has a different storyline, and you can't believe like what the talking heads say and tell you're supposed to do. You could be at a trade show and there's 20 different private equity guys coming by your booth, and 10 of them say you should do it this way, 10 of them say do it the other way. So the decision to manufacture or have someone else make it is a very interesting one, that there's not one way or the other that is better. It's each circumstance is different. And so there are things like you've got something really existentially like wonderful, like no one else can make it. You may not be able to patent it, but you don't want other people to know how you make it. So that may be worthwhile of, how you go about making the stuff yourself. There is an opportunity. So if you're making something that is easier to make, where the equipment and the companies that contract pack out there are plentiful and they've already paid for all their assets. So every new piece of business that they get is just a variable piece of revenue for them that they can push across just their overhead, which is very low. Those circumstances give you the ability to make something at someone else's place and still be able to make an adequate margin. But if you can't get the margin that you need with a contract packer, and you think you can get the amount that you need in margin to be a successful company by making it yourself, then don't be afraid to make it yourself. Yeah,
that's, again, a whole nother conversation that I could have with you. But no, the great words of wisdom, good advice. And for you guys listening out there, make sure to keep all that stuff in mind, because like Scott said, there isn't a right way to do it. There's not like, oh, everyone must go through a co-packer because that's the way to do it. No, it's what works for you, it sounds like. But I appreciate the conversation, Scott, and I'm glad you stopped by. And I hope Rhythm Superfoods keeps growing at the high velocity that it is.
Great, thanks. Appreciate being here.